Hi, it's Mark Bossert, producer of the #1 automotive podcast in Canada, the Pawlik Automotive Podcast, here with Mr. Bernie Pawlik, and we're talking cars. How are you doing this morning, Bernie?
Doing very well.
So, 2008 Range Rover Sport Supercharged. A little hard to get the engine started because it was trying to start that to smoke it. It was tough. Is that what was going on?
Well, actually, it started fine, but what was happening is there was an awful lot of smoke coming out of the tailpipe. And how much smoke, you might ask? There was like a ton. You start the engine, there's just clouds of a whitish colored smoke just billowing everywhere. It was pretty serious. My first thought is, okay, this engine's done. You know, like it's got a severe, just my first look at it, the head gasket must be blown somehow. It's just pumping coolant through this thing because of the color of the smoke. So that was kind of the initial, that was my initial thought on it.
And how did you diagnose the problem?
Well, we started, of course, looking at things, removing the spark plugs, looking at the condition of the spark plugs, pressure testing the cooling system. We actually did a compression test on the engine with the spark plugs out as well. Compression was good, all even all across, which was a good sign for the engine. And the spark plugs didn't have any sort of coolant fouling. So, but they definitely had they definitely looked like things had been running rich, and there was a lot of oiliness on the spark plugs. So put the spark plugs back in, fired everything back up, and really looked at the smoke again and realized it actually had more of a bluish hue to it than white, even though, it was still pretty light colored, but just not that typical kind of blue you normally see. But definitely after a while going, okay, it's definitely an oil burning issue and not a coolant issue. So digging a little further, I'll just cut to the chase. What we found is a crankcase breather valve was blown, causing oil to be just sucked into the engine and burnt up. Really not a huge problem in the end to fix. But what probably would have led us to diagnose that a lot sooner would have been some code, maybe a check engine light on, and some lean condition codes, which happens in a lot of other European vehicles. But that wasn't the case with this Range Rover. There was one stored code in the vehicle computer, and it was only an evap system code for a purge valve problem. And the purge valve would never cause a smoking issue, and it was kind of, I say a minor code because the check engine light wasn't even on, so it was just a code that was kind of stored in the background. So it took a little bit to get to it, but we basically found, again, we found the purge valve was the issue. So let's...
Crankcase breather valve.
Crankcase breather valve, thank you. I keep confusing that. I always rehearse these podcasts and think about it, and I keep saying purge valve. Crankcase breather valve. Thanks, Mark.
So what's involved in replacing that valve?
Well, it's basically the valve is bolted onto the right valve cover. Really not a lot of work to do. It's pretty straightforward. And I'll just get in some pictures. We'll have a look. So there's our 2008 Range Rover Sport. There's also in behind, there's the 2013 Range Rover Sport we're doing some other service on. So they look kind of similar, just a little subtly different. So as far as the vehicle, so there's the purge valve. This is the piece that was defective. And,
crankcase breather valve.
Crankcase breather valve. Thank you, Mark. I'm glad I got you here today. There's the crankcase breather valve located in the right valve cover. So this is the new unit put in. This is the hose that actually goes to the back of the intake system, where the fumes that come out of the crankcase are sucked in, and that's the new valve, which is basically bolted into the right valve cover. And after, of course, I'm always curious as to see what happened with the part, why it failed. So we broke the top of the valve off, and this is there's a large rubber diaphragm underneath it. There's a little valve and a spring, and there you can see a tear in the diaphragm, and this is where the oil is being sucked through the valve and into the engine. So that tear should not be there. It just basically happens from old age. There's a lot of, crankcase fumes are very toxic. It's obviously a very special rubber, but they don't last forever. So 11 years was about all this one got.
So is this the same piece as a PCV or PC valve?
PCV valve, yeah. PCV stands for positive crankcase ventilation valve. And it is basically essentially the same thing, although I tend to think of the more old traditional type that you'd find on an American V8 engine or a lot of four-cylinder Japanese type vehicles, where it would be just a little cylindrical valve about the diameter of a large vacuum hose would clip into the valve cover. And some engines still use a valve of similar type. It's basically the same thing. For some reason, a lot of European vehicles use these large diaphragm breather valves. And these actually tend to fail more frequently. Like the old PCV valves would tend to carbon up and sludge up over time, and you'd actually have restricted breathing, whereas these ones here, they just tend to rip after time and cause other issues like lean condition codes and blue smoke burning.
So what does the crankcase need to breathe?
Okay, so when in an internal combustion engine, when it's running, of course, there's an explosion in every cylinder, every piston. And with that, every time that explosion happens, 99% of the exhaust goes out the exhaust valve, the waste products of the explosion, but some of it escapes past the piston rings. It can't be sealed 100%. And that gas that escapes past the piston rings is called blow-by gases. Now, if you were to have an engine completely sealed, that engine would probably run for 30 seconds and then, explode due to the pressure. So in the olden day, going back many decades, there would be a road draft tube, and this road draft tube would basically be a breather tube, and those blow-by gases would just breathe out onto the road and into the atmosphere. The thing about those gases is they're about the worst pollutants generated in an internal combustion engine. They're just horrific. The polluting gases are just the worst. So when they started developing emission equipment on engines, the first thing they developed was a breathing system called a PCV system, positive crankcase ventilation, where it would actually suck those vapors back into the engine and reburn them again and essentially clean things up. So that was a huge step forward in vehicle emission reduction and really, really good for the environment for smog removal. Started in California, way back in the 60s, and then just eventually every car has it. And they've just got more and more sophisticated on a lot of European vehicles, but that's basically what the system does.
And was there anything else that you replaced on this vehicle?
Yeah, so on this Range Rover, as I mentioned earlier, when we were diagnosing it, we looked at the spark plugs. They were, tight, quite fouled from all the oil that had been sucked through the engine. So we replaced the spark plugs. And it was also due for an oil, basically an A service, maintenance service. So we did an oil change and filter, and everything ran really well. The owner was really happy with it. No more smoke coming out the tailpipe, and really not a huge cost repair, considering when you looked at the smoke earlier.
Absolutely. So if you're looking for service for your Range Rover in Vancouver, the guys to see are Pawlik Automotive. You can reach them at 604-327-7112 to book your appointment. You have to call and book ahead. They're busy. Or check out the website, pawlikautomotive.com, YouTube channel, Pawlik Auto Repair. And of course, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Again, #1 podcast in Canada, automotive podcast in Canada, #1 in Korea, varying between 1 and 2 in the United Kingdom. And we thank you so much for listening. Thanks, Bernie.
Yeah, thanks for listening and watching, and thanks, Mark.